Welcome. I just want to say it's, wow, an honor to be here, honor to have you guys all coming together. And yeah, just thinking about the training I'm sharing, and you've got a chance to get the book. Pat has graced you all with a copy, so just kind of awed by this. It's pretty crazy.
I think it's awesome, Jen.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, your hard work.
Yeah, it's kind of weird, you know, putting it out there. I was aware of after I did it. I go, oh man, what did I just do? Because people are going, maybe people will read this, and what will people think? And so there's all. It's weird. I was surprised at my what got triggered in me around my old messages, which I want to dive into a little bit tonight. This is the healing cycle, which the book is based on. Each chapter, like chapter 2, starts with grace, and then subsequent chapters: safety, vulnerability, truth, ownership, and repentance. This came out of my work when I was in charge of Marriage Matters, and just way cool to see how many of you go way back, and how many of you, even if you weren't in Marriage Matters, you've been doing marriage work all along, pre-marriage. And so yeah, actually there's the handouts coming out for you. There's one of those sheets kind of has the talk. I'm not sure what is on the left side.
On the left side.
On the left side is just an outline of what I'm going to be diving into. But there's two kinds of pieces to the wheel. One is this is the process that a person goes through in their healing. Okay? And I'm going to invite you into your own brokenness this evening, and just kind of get a sense of, you know, to what extent is this kind of a process you've gone through in your own healing. And starting with grace, and we'll focus tonight on grace, and I'm not sure kind of what we'll do subsequently as far as trainings, but I imagine we can tackle, you know, maybe a chapter every time we do a little training. But one of the things we've done all sorts of different kinds of groups. Those of you who have been in Marriage Matters or Restore, you know, there's those 9-week group type of things where the group stays together. And so one of the things that begins to happen is the groups get deeper and deeper. And with the groups that we're doing in Building Stronger Marriages, they change every week. You know, it's pretty rare to have the same group show up. And so one of the thoughts I have is basically what's so important, I think, for us to get as leaders is the first half of the wheel: grace, safety, vulnerability, and truth. And along with each of these steps of healing are skills which we as leaders can develop and work on and grow in. And that's a little bit of my hope that as you go through this, you also tackle the skills. But where I want to start with tonight is grace and brokenness. One of the things that you've probably heard me talk about before is how important it is to be able to lead from brokenness. And I was just aware of, you know, when this started for me was a long time ago, when I first read Henry Nouwen's book, Wounded Healer. It's like, wow, this makes a lot of sense. But I was aware of this being a scary dynamic or principle for me. You know, growing, being trained as a counselor, you know, you kind of have that little distance, and in teaching, you know, it's kind of like, well, if I tell you some of my brokenness, I'll lose respect. You know, you'll think less of me. And so it really kind of went against, you know, my training and what I kind of thought about leadership. And I just began, I was aware of stepping into this, and I was just amazed at how people would respond. You know, if I said something like on a Marriage Matters night, you know, that I was really an angry guy, you know, afterwards men would come up and say, I'm an angry man too. And it's just like, I was just so amazed at how it opened doors instead of closed doors. So from that dynamic, I just really encourage you, and have encouraged you as leaders, to just be aware of your brokenness and your healing, the process you've gone through in your brokenness, and to get what a gift that is for you. What a gift that is for the people at your table, the couples that come into building stronger marriages. That's a place where you lead from. It's kind of like leading from under rather than on top. You know, you're not better than them, and you have all the answers. No, you come from a broken place yourself, and we all have that brokenness piece in our lives. So, one of the things I want to just kind of push pause and invite you into a broken place in your life. When you think history, and you're not going to need to share this, you know. Okay, so don't think of sharing it, but I want you to get in touch with the kind of dynamic that goes on with you or went on with you when you experienced brokenness. So feel free to just kind of put pause, put your pencils down if you're taking notes. I invite you to close your eyes and go back to a place. Go back to a place of brokenness, and could be the most broken time if you feel comfortable in going back to that kind of a place. If that feels like too much, no need to go back to that place. But where is a broken place for you that you would go back to when you think of your own life experience? Just be aware of the event, what happened, what was said, what was done. Be aware of how you felt when that happened. Be aware of the stories that you made up about the experience. Have to make sense of this stuff in some way, so we make up stories about why this is going on. Why did this happen to me? Kind of thing. What stories came up for you? And what were you aware of as far as what you needed? Whether it happened or didn't happen, what was a need that was underneath your experience? What might you have longed for? And then how did you cope with this? How did you deal with it? And were you alone, or were there others to support you and help you through? Have a little snapshot of this experience of brokenness in your life. I invite you to open your eyes, come back to this room. When you think of that time in your life, just be aware of invite you to give me some feedback around what did you need? What did you need when you were going through that time? Maybe you did get it, maybe you didn't get it, but was something popped for you? Anybody? Yeah.
Protection, safety.
Protection, safety. Yeah. Protection, safety.
Somebody who understood.
To be understood.
Yeah.
Yeah. Someone to get you.
Yeah.
What you were going through. Yeah. Absolutely. Yes.
Hope.
Hope. Yeah.
No things would possibly get better.
Maybe they could turn around.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Reassurance.
Reassurance.
And an explanation.
Okay, so again, explanation of this. Yes. Good. Imagine, but think of what you were wanting and what you were longing for, and just be aware, did you get that in that place? You know, how many of you really were alone in that experience? See, and that's just what's so common in our brokenness experience, is that we're alone And we don't have anybody to kind of give us that hope, to give us that understanding, to really be there for us. And big picture, what I think we need in all that is grace. Some sort of grace. Something we can't give ourselves. You know, grace is that something from someone else. And I know, I mean, you probably heard this story from me before, but a key time when I experienced brokenness is when my son Josh was born and he had birth problems. Had to send him to another hospital. I just remember probably about one of the most scary times in my life. You know, just kind of talk about out of control, letting go. And obviously he turned out well because he helped me author this book. So it was a good ending with all that. But I'll never forget how scared I was. And a big piece that I really got was how alone I was. How alone I was. And how in need I was for somebody to show up. And what I really had was nobody. And that was really a powerful awareness because I grew up very independent, and that's what I thought I needed to be. And here was a situation where I was really alone and in need. And remember the negative stories that easily surface, because one of the things that happens in these times, it's easy for negative stories. I'm bad, you know, I did something wrong. You know, I mean, I grew up, God's punishing me. And here I am, an adult 30-year-old, and that flashes in my mind. So negative stories without anybody to say something different, you know, except me to wrestle with this. And I just remember I was in the hospital, and my brother showed up. And just like, oh my goodness, and how grateful I was to have him show up and be with me, and I wasn't alone anymore. But it was kind of like, wow, I got an experience of grace, something I couldn't do for myself. And it was just a huge, and it really sent me, it was really pivotal for me, knowing that that's what I needed to do. And it really kind of created a key verse out of this whole wheel that I've kind of created is that 2 Corinthians 1:3-4. Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, Father of compassion, the God of all comfort, who comforts us in our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves have received from God. God, the God of all comfort, who comforts us in our troubles. And I was struck by how does He comfort us in our troubles? He comforts us through others. You know, that's the lie, that's the flesh involved with God's grace. It was my brother coming in, and gradually what began to happen is I began to have other men in my life, develop a support system, and just struck me how much I needed that, and so I began to go after that. It began a huge shift in my life at that time. And the other piece is that as a result of my experience, it opens the door for me to comfort others. So the big question that I have for us all tonight is, to what extent do you get grace? Do you get grace? Our people that come in are coming in with all sorts of stuff going on in their marriages. My story, there's no such thing as a marriage that's not broken. You know, they may look pretty good on the outside, but inside they're probably struggling. So they need grace, and we are God's hands and feet to provide grace for them. I just think we need to be able to get it in order to pass it on, because that's our work. That's our work. And I like the story in Luke chapter 7, which talks about the sinful woman that came to Jesus. She broke a jar of alabaster ointment and covered Jesus with her tears and with the ointment. And Simon the Pharisee, whose house that was, saw Jesus doing this, and in his head he was going, doesn't he know how sinful she is? And you wouldn't be doing this if you knew that she was such an awful woman. And Jesus gave him a little parable that said, a man was in debt for 500 denarii, another 50 denarii, and they both got their debts absolved. And Jesus goes, which one of those is likely to love me more? And he says, well, the one with 500 denarii. And Jesus goes, that's right. It's kind of like, it's like those who are forgiven little love little. Those who are forgiven much love much. And it's not like you have to go through some major trauma in order to get grace, but I think you got to get it. We have to get it so that we have that to offer the people that come to our workshops. It's all about grace. Paul writes in Ephesians, we're saved by grace. In Romans chapter 5, verse 2, talks about we stand in grace. 2 Peter 3:18, we grow in grace. The image I have is of Psalm 40. When we are in our brokenness, we're wallowing in the mire and the mud, and what does God do? He hears our call. He lifts us out of the mud and out of the mire, gives us a new place to stand, that standing in grace place, puts a new song in our heart. You know, that's what grace does. And I just think, you know, that we just need to get that, need to pass it on. And in our brokenness, we don't get all better. You know, we grow, we heal, but like the Apostle Paul, we have a thorn in our flesh, don't we? So you think of that, especially those of you who get addictions, you know how that works, that you know, it's like we're in recovery. We're not recovered kind of thing, but we're recovering, and there's that thorn. We're vulnerable to more brokenness, and it's huge for us to get. And what did God say when Paul brought his brokenness to the Lord time after time after time, 3 times? What was his answer?
My grace is sufficient.
My grace is sufficient. So in the whole healing process, that grace is what we need to hold on to and trust God for, and what we have to pass on. So it's huge. I love this verse. I think it captures what we do in building stronger marriages. And what it opens the door to, what I would consider heart skills. One of the things that people really want to know, when I do this training, also, give me some skills. What skills? I mean, imagine if you were leading the table you're at. What are some skills for me to lead this table better? And I do want to offer skills, but in grace, the chapter on grace, I believe the most important skills we have to offer is ourselves. That's who we have to offer the people that are at our table. Ourselves, our story of brokenness, our story of grace, our story of healing. And that's the best thing we have to offer. And if we get that, I think we create a space that invites people into that safety and healing process themselves. Yeah. Okay, what I want to invite you into, and those of you who've heard me talk, you hear me do this a lot, like every time I talk about family of origin, is to create a timeline. Do your brokenness timeline. If there was one thing, if I said you have to do this to be a leader, it would be you have to do a brokenness timeline. And maybe some of you have done it. I don't know. But you got a little bit of that, in the visualization we just did. Now, what I want to do right now is invite you to kind of begin the brokenness timeline. And maybe some of you have already done this before. But I want you to go back to your childhood. And I want you to go back to a trauma you experienced in childhood. Now, I don't know if some of you went there, when you think of your most painful time. Some of our most painful times are in childhood. But one of the things that if you didn't go back to childhood and you were more of a recent experience of brokenness, the thing I want to invite you into is those stories you made up as adults if you experience brokenness. you know, and kind of think that, where did those stories come from? What I believe is they probably came from childhood. Those are the roots. That's what makes me so vulnerable. You know, one of the things you hear about a lot of post-traumatic stress disorders with veterans coming back from Iran and Iraq. You know, it's kind of like, and how some of them kind of skate through without PTSD. You know, and there's a lot of variables to that. But one of the things that I've seen some research on is that those veterans who have had traumatic experiences early in their lives are more vulnerable to PTSD as adults. It's like there's a vulnerability there to those negative stories, that you're bad, that you're no good. And for some of us, we probably carry a more vulnerable kind of a story or a narrative that we bring to our adult experiences of trauma. And some of us have big T's, I call big traumas. Those are really big T's. And some of us have trouble kind of getting you know, sense of what are traumas. And I like to call those little T's because we have little things that happened in our growing up days. But those little things likely built up over time. And so I want you to think, and some of you may have some really clear experiences growing up. But I want you to identify one, and one of the things to begin to do on your handout there at the bottom of the handout is a line to identify a timeline that you can do a childhood. I mean, one of the things I always encourage people to do is to, you know, get like several sheets of paper and draw a horizontal line on one sheet of paper, and make that childhood or 0 to 5. Then another sheet of paper for 6 to 10, like elementary school, a sheet of paper for middle school, sheet of paper for high school, and then college, adult, young adult, and just kind of really create a timeline there. And because one of my guesses is one of the things you'll get is seeing a pattern that surfaces that way. Yeah.
Can you direct people, the sheet he's speaking from is on the left. There's a little bit of confusion like what sheet we're talking about, but just look at the one on the left in your folder.
In your folder on the left, yeah, it says leadership training broken this timeline. And down at the bottom, it kind of walks you through what I want you to do, and I'll give you a you know, kind of walk you through each step here, and give you just a couple minute or so to jot some things down. One of the things, the way I want to invite you to do is draw a line down, a vertical line down to identify the event of yours. For example, just kind of an event I go through, and you've heard me say, is that in first grade I went off to boarding school. That would be the event, kind of a thing. So identify the event, and those of you who are familiar with the wheel, you know, kind of that's the facts of the wheel, and I have that in parentheses there. So yeah, anybody need pencils? We have pens, pencils, pens here. If anybody needs anything. So what's the fact? What happened? How did you feel when that happened? And for some of us, that may be difficult to get at. I mean, when I think of going off to boarding school, you know, it's kind of like I just kind of waved bye to my parents, and you know, I was a big boy, and you know, I was all grown up, and actually kindergarten, I freaked out going to kindergarten. So I think I learned I can't freak out because it won't help my parents, you know. So being good works better. So, but then I go, wow, I wonder how terrified I was, because when I sent my son to kindergarten, I'll never forget. He was scared. He didn't know anybody. He didn't know the teacher, and he was freaking out. And I'm looking at him, going, actually, it's so weird. I said what my dad said to me, almost. I said, "It'll be all right." That's what my dad said to me. And he added one phrase, "God will be with me," and I didn't get that. I didn't see God with me there. But it'll be all right. I was just going, oh, I just negated his feelings. And so it's kind of like I imagine, you know, my feelings were negated. So it's like, how did I feel? I don't know how I felt. So invite you into wondering, with the event, how might you have felt if you were too young to remember how you did feel? But what's the feeling? And then the next one is, what's the story that surfaced for you? What story? And especially as a youngster, I want to say there's no way you didn't create a negative story. No way. For me, one for sure, I'm alone. I'm alone. That's the story I made up. And, it's kind of like, I didn't have that, this is my lot in life yet, that I'm alone, and certainly there was nobody there. I was off to boarding school all by myself. Scared, alone, and wondering what's wrong with me. Do I have what it takes to survive? Is a message that surfaced for me. Do you remember your story? One of the things I invite is our stories are key. I always think when Heibels says to us in service, do you know your top 3 spiritual gifts? Turn to your neighbor, tell your neighbor your top 3 spiritual gifts. We should know them just like this. And I want to say, what are your top 3 negative stories that you have in your life? Because those stories stop you from doing your gifts. And do you know them? Because the more you have clarity, I believe, the more you can go after them. And so that's why I want to invite you. Do you have clarity around these stories and how to go after them? But we have to be aware first. That's why I always say we can't change unless we're aware. And this is huge. You become aware of this. So what stories did you make up? Identify your need underneath that. You get your need, our feelings. I talked about this. Our feelings often help get us to our needs. If I'm sad, I need comfort. If I'm scared, I need assurance. If I'm angry, I need protection. What are the needs underneath? Some of you identified them just in saying, in your visualization, safety, longing, hope. What are those needs that are there, and being aware of maybe those needs not getting met. And again, if they're not met, then we go back to the stories we have to make up about why they're not being met. And then this is big, our actions. And as a kid, these are our budding ways of coping, our budding defenses. Or do we tend to shut down, or do we tend to get active, fight back? We kind of go into that fight or flight or freeze kind of thing. Maybe for some of you who are addicted, maybe addiction started really early. Maybe you were in a home where there was alcohol. I know one of our marriage leaders. It's like after every party, he'd go around drinking all the leftover booze. Didn't take long to become an alcoholic. A way of coping with the pain of life. What do you remember? Where did you go? Maybe fantasy was a big part of your escape, but you developed your coping mechanisms. One of the things that's important, see to what extent you see this, you identify this, because one of the things that begins to happen is we begin to create a lens by which we look to our future. The interesting thing, I tell people the worst year of my life that I was aware of was 6th grade. 6th grade, I was coming back from overseas, leaving a school of, where there were 3 5th graders. I was the number 2 student in the class, kind of thing. Very smart. And of course, the second dumbest too. But. And I come back to a classroom of 30 6th graders. And actually, there were 2 6th grade classes of 30. 60 kids, I had no clue. No clue. I was completely lost. It's kind of like I had no idea what's in. One of the things I got really good at is scanning. What are people wearing? What are haircuts? Who's got the cool shoes? What do I need to get? Because I had really ugly black high tops, which, if they were Converse, would be really in these days, kind of thing, probably. I don't know that, but I see black high tops every once in a while. But not having a clue. and all alone. All alone. Now, the interesting thing was that they would not be there. See, already locked in to my belief system is I'm alone. So why ask for help? Because they won't give help. Now, I don't know that, but that shows what happens to our stories and how locked in they get. And they just get reinforced, so we believe the story even more. And again, the same story, do I have what it takes? You know, I don't think or I question whether I had what it takes. You know, competency, all those kinds of things I really took a hit in 6th grade. But that's the kind of thing I want to invite you into as you look at your timeline. Notice, here's another trauma. Here's another event. And when you look at the stories that you make up, do you see yourself reinforcing those old stories? See? And it's just like, wow, you really are recreating the messages of the world, of others. And often what we develop is our fate. Have you ever said to yourself, I'm fated to do this? This is the way life is for me, will be for me. And unfortunately, we bring all that into our marriages. All that into our marriages. So when we have marital problems, those are the kinds of messages that pop to the surface. Something happens in our marriage, and I married someone who is about as present as anybody, who listens about as well as anybody. But when something happens, my first reaction is to step away, to pull back, to think, oh, I'm all alone in this. And so things like, the trauma around my son's birth, boom, these surface. Interestingly enough, let me just see what time it is. A lot of you know I've gone through prostate cancer, and I just got a blood test, and my numbers were lowest as ever after 4 years. And so, but it's really interesting. When I first got diagnosed, it was at 60, and decades have been really important to me. Decades of my 50s were the most productive in my life. I was in my sweet spot at work, everything's great, and here come the 60s, and I'm going, oh, what are the 60s going to bring? And when I was 60, I got prostate cancer. And I go, oh no, death, sickness, death. I'm in big trouble. And there's a battle there in front of me, and there was a battle in front of me. But the thing that I was really aware of is I wasn't alone. I turned that around, that message around. I couldn't believe the people I were telling. I would never have told you just now, early on. It's just like I wouldn't bring you in, but I had people in my life. I brought people in. I told the marriage community, and I've kept telling people, and it's just like we can turn these messages away. We are not stuck, and we have hope, like Steve was saying, and that's just what we can do to help our people who come in, because there's going to be mostly, I want to say, men who coming in as couples, and they do it themselves, right? They're macho, they got to do it, and we can give them another story that says maybe you don't have to do this yourself. It's okay to embrace your vulnerability. It's okay to embrace your brokenness, and we as leaders can be alongside of them. One, because we get grace, and we get our stories, and we get that we're working on our stories, and we're changing this around, and we can come alongside other couples and help them change around as well. So I want to encourage you to kind of get at those stories. Again, to think that if trauma were to happen tonight, the likelihood of those stories, they would pop. They're kind of knee-jerk reflexes, but one of the things we can do is push pause. I like to always think, knee-jerk reflex, there's a stimulus, a response, and I kick, okay? And the challenge is, can I create space in that? There's a stimulus, and before I kick, I can still kick. I can still go there if I want to, but I can create space, and maybe there's another story. You know, and certainly we have our God stories, but those are hard because so often in our heads. But the challenge is how do we really experience this? You know, in order to not be alone, I had to get other relationships. You know, I had to work that muscle that wasn't a very developed muscle. Okay, so we have about 20 minutes, right? So what I want to invite you to do is to share at your table, just kind of your awareness. You know, anything pop for you, any story. Yeah, feel free to go to the bathroom because we haven't had that break yet. But what is, you know, one thing, is there a particular story that you really resonate with that when under stress, that story pops for you? The other thing to think about, I haven't talked about this, but what we're going to be doing is bringing this dynamic in to the next few months. Like for example, sexuality is next. How do these stories that you bring throughout lifehood impact your sexual intimacy? You know, it's kind of like maybe competency is a big deal for you because that's how you feel good about yourself. So you bring competency into the sexual arena. Or maybe you have a question of being loved. I'm not loved. I'm not lovable. So you bring that not lovable piece into your relationship. And as a result, it gets really messy. The same thing with money. You know, what is it about money that makes it difficult for you to talk to your spouse about? You know, maybe I'm alone in my money kind of thing, or we not very good together. You know, it's like, what do we do and how do these stories impact that? And then we're going to be talking about addictions, where, you know, the stories are huge in I think what drives our addiction. You know, what do I need medication for? Because I'm a bad guy, I'm an alone guy, I'm an incompetent guy, so I need to medicate. And then lastly, we're going to talk about forgiveness. So I want to invite you in because your work continues. Your journey continues. You'll be stepping into these arenas with the people that you bring into that are at your table. And so challenge you to be working on this, because as you keep working on this, you keep bringing your story and kind of an ability to experience grace and to walk alongside of them. So just at your table for the next 15 minutes, share a little bit about. I was going to keep time, but why don't we just go do it? Just make sure no one takes all the time.